Hi everyone, welcome to Masculinidad 98. Today we have a little bit of a bilingual episode because the person that's going to be joining us is living currently in the United States. She's multicultural. You're going to hear about her once the episode starts. But I just wanted to clarify that we had a little technical issue. That's why you're not going to listen to the regular intro. This is me while I'm editing the episode. So I hope that's my parrot. There we go. Okay. Um, of course. Yeah. Okay. I do hope you enjoy this episode. So, without further ado, here we go.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation. Um, I think this topic needs to be talked about more. And oftentimes, what happens is people don't have the language of like Marianismo and things like that. And so, love to start our conversation with just defining Marianismo. And so, Marianismo is a very complex traditional value that is reinforced through gender norms on women and girls. And so it often, all right. So it is a gender norm that's reinforced on women and girls within the Latina culture. And so there are certain values that are reinforced, and that's being virtuous, being self silencing. So you hear those terms of um, más calladita te ves bonita, things like that, right?
Hmm.
And self sacrifice. So it has a lot to do with the women being the one that takes on the family, just being that chain, that glue, right? And also being nurturing. They often find themselves in roles as mothers, as wives, and things like that. And also being very spiritual. They're the spiritual pillar of the family. They're usually the ones telling you, like, vamos a misa, let's go to church. And so it's a very complex thing because there are positive characteristics within it, but I think it's how sometimes it can go into an extreme, right? And you can't have machismo without marianismo. It's very interconnected, one reinforces the other. And so I think what I found in my experiences and even in my study is that the men in the family were kind of like the police of the family. Like they were the ones that made the rules, who could go out, what could be worn, especially for the women. And so it was a little difficult to kind of navigate the things that felt positive, but also things that also felt just maybe like a control or like this power dynamic between men and women.
Okay. I also forgot to mention that I met Sandra in a psychology conference for Latin Americans. And it was very interesting because I saw her poster presentation, and it was one of the few that really, really interested me. The surprisingly, all of the posters that interested me had to do with Marianismo. There were like three the same day
Yeah.
that had to do, and
Mhm.
they were in your same aisle. They were just in the back. Um, but yeah, like it's interesting how you mention how men could be policing the whole Marianismo thing, how it encompasses positive aspects, but also it has like a very risky outcome when we
Mhm.
take it to the extremes. And I'd like to know what you think, because like I think about gender roles, and I think that they aren't inherently bad. It's the rigidity of it that is
Yes.
what really makes us be like take it to a dangerous place. Because if you say like, women cooking, okay, women can cook. Obviously, that doesn't define them.
And good, really
Yeah, exactly.
good.
Everyone should cook. Honestly, everyone should survive. I
Yeah,
love to cook.
it's a survival technique.
Yeah, I love to cook because I don't like to be hungry. So we everything evens out basically. But it's interesting because like a lot of people say that when we confront them with you need to be more critical about gender roles and all this stuff and on sexism and in general,
Mhm,
they think that it it needs to be that you need to abandon whatever it is you think gender roles are, and it's
mhm.
not really like that. So what has your experience been when you try to talk to people about maybe deconstructing those
Mhm.
Marianismo views and stuff?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, definitely, porque I've had the pleasure of working with people that are younger, like in within my generation or even younger than that, that have like very liberated views around machismo and marianismo, and they're like, you know what, maybe they are on the side of more letting go, but I can still see like that cultural clash. And I'll give you an example. In my dissertation study, I had I think a 19-year-old participant, and one of the quotes really stuck with me is that she said, by engaging in Marianismo, I was silencing my queerness, like who I actually was, because Marianismo, again, is all about self sacrifice, right? But one of the questions that I also had is, how do traditional gender roles still impact you to this day? And I think she said something along the lines of, I still show up for my family. As much as it pains me, my brother was not going to be the one making the plans, but I'm going to make them anyway because I love my brother, and so even though she's let go maybe those more extreme factors, like you said, she still was making some sacrifices, being that nurturer role, being that glue, right? And she was okay with it in that moment, right? And so I think we find the way to maybe make it our own. And I think that's how you spoke about the rigidity, that I think we do have to find ways to be more fluid in our gender roles and what we choose to uphold and not uphold. And so I think it was so interesting to also research queer Latina people because they are so fluid, they are so, or they try to be, right, liberated, especially in a society that tells you have to be this or this. Um, Another one that I saw was, I am feminine. I am a nurturer. I am the eldest daughter, But also in that lesbian identity, they were also like, I'm also the leader. I also like to plan dates. I also, I like to be outspoken, right? And I think it's important to see that it's not necessarily bad to hold on to these gender roles. It's how we apply them.
Well,
Definitely.
exactly, and it's interesting because, for example, you talk about sacrifice, and if we were do the hypothetical of analyzing it through gender differences between men and women, cis
Hmm.
hetero men and women, we would say that both include sacrifice, but they manifest in different ways. Because I feel like, and I would love to know what you think. I feel like women's sacrifice, in terms of how it is encompassed by Marianismo, is very silenced. It's very
Hmm.
unnoticed. It's automatic. It's expected from you and stuff like that. While men's sacrifice, it's very visible. It's very,
Hmm.
see how I'm sacrificing everything for my family
Hmm.
because I'm working all day, or I'm sweating I don't know, like I'm
Hmm.
sweating blood or something like that. And it's interesting because I feel like that adds to the fact that women or femme people tend to be pushed into guilt, basically,
Hmm.
because their sacrifices are being silenced. Whenever they try to get outside of that box,
Hmm.
there's guilt involved with this,
Yeah.
because it shouldn't be like this. Why do I feel wrong if I'm just setting boundaries and stuff like that?
Mhm.
How would you say that sacrifice encompasses within Marianismo?
Yeah, I think you said it best, that it is very silent. It's unseen, like it is la mama waking up at 4 in the morning to make sure that everyone's fed that day, los lunches, for the husband, for the kids, It's, sometimes I've heard of women not working and wanting to work, right? Because their main focus is making sure that everyone in the family is okay. And so I think it's about also just giving credit where credit is due. Like, I think, being a protector, being a provider is great. And we do pour into those spaces and males, when they are working hard. But I think sometimes we don't give enough thanks to those women or feminine energies in our lives that are also sacrificing and doing things for us to continue on, right? And so it's more so about seeing and putting, the kind of equaling the leveling ground. Like it is, yes, as much as again, protection, providing is very important in these dynamics. It's also important that nurturing aspect, that inner like feeling of safety and comfort, that can't, be found in many spaces. And I think when I also think about respeto, ¿verdad? Like, um, respeto also often goes for elders and men,
Hmm.
los hombres and the elders. But I think we also have to have put respect on the women. They are there working hard, sacrificing, and usually they kind of minimize the work that they do too. I've seen that often where, the women are doing so many things for the family, for the provider, and they're just like, oh, it's no big deal. Like, no, it is. It is. And you deserve to be celebrated, loved, and feel safe. I think safety is also a big component that, you asked about what was it? Like, how can men maybe show up in a way that does create a supportive space for women? And it's knowing that they can use their power and their privilege for good, right? That, you know, we talk about caballerismo and how, men can be chivalrous, they can be kind, they can be they can be a safe space for women, children, whoever is in the family to be themselves, right? And so instead of using that, mm, again, those powers and privileges to control, it's more so to guide, to love, to help women, like what's something that I recently learned from a male figure. I think just like, economics, budgeting, right? And I was so appreciative for him, and so having those spaces where we can guide and teach, right, rather than just be controlling.
Okay. And for example, when we talk about rewards, because I feel like society teaches you since you're little, since you're an infant, they teach you like if
Mhm.
you act like this, you're going to receive these rewards. And those
Mm,
types of, I would call them fake
mhm,
promises of rewards are at the center of why there's so many dissonance between traditional gender roles and the frustration of people that are not getting
mhm,
those rewards, basically.
mhm,
Because if we talk about the male experience, we would say, oh, if you're chivalrous, if you work out, if you have money and stuff like that, you will
mhm,
receive social gratification, respect from your peers, sexual
mhm,
gratification, amongst other things. And then men tend to focus only on those superficial things to have like a checkbox
mhm.
from the man box, basically. And
Yeah.
because real people encompass way more complexity than that, they're left without that social gratification, that respect, or that sexual
Mhm,
gratification. And it causes frustration that a lot of people tend to go like in terms of men to the manosphere, the extremely male dominated spaces, stuff like that. And it's
mhm.
just a sexist echo chamber. But in
Yeah.
terms of female experiences, like what would you say are those like rewards, and do you see like it could be faulty rewards that are being
Mhm.
proclaimed? Like what do you think
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, I think, yeah, rewards and maybe like expectations. Like, this is what you're expected to do as a Latina woman, or this is who you're expected to be as a Latino male, right? And to be successful in those circles or those binaries again, like you said, you have to be strong, you're making good money, looking good, like all of those things are very like in that dominant male sphere. And I would say similarly to the woman, it's like, yeah, looking good, making sure that you are virginal, pure. I think that continues from childhood up until adulthood, that, you have to be ready for marriage and to settle down and to have that like white picket fence and los niños and all these things, right? Those are the rewards. And I think sometimes what happens is like, we don't get into talking about like, do you even want these rewards? Is this how you want your life to look like? It's just more so of my tias did it, my mom did it, my abuela before that. Like, this is just how it's been, and I think we don't often sit down and say, you know what, like, do I want to continue to be like in this role, or do I want to expand? And so I think it's more so of understanding that our lives can look different and happiness can also look very different. And, more so of just not looking at the surface level of how I look, how I feel. It's more so of what do I want? What makes me happy? What makes me safe? What makes me feel loved? What things can I do towards being my authentic self? And sometimes it is being a mom. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is having that six-figure salary. Sometimes it's, wanting a slower life. So I think we have to also understand that, we don't have to necessarily always follow these binaries and these like ways of being, that we can define our own happiness. And I think that's where the true reward is, and where we feel the most fulfilled too.
I feel like I like how you brought up expectations instead of rewards, because there
Hmm.
are a lot of expectations tied to gender roles, but
Yeah.
because of patriarchal structures, the dynamic between gender expectations and male behavior seems like it would be more based on reward, while
Hmm.
with women it would be more based on this is how it should be without the reward,
Hmm.
or the reward would be
It's
like,
just like esta idea de like superar, like
yeah,
you gotta take it porque pues eso that's how it is. It is what it is, right? I heard that a
exactly,
lot,
yeah,
and
no,
I'm just
exactly,
like, wait, I don't like this,
yeah,
like, and I'm the type that doesn't like to settle, and so when I catch a red flag, I'm not gonna just ignore it. And I've been in those situations where I go to a loved one, a tia, a mom, and ask, what is this? My mom, not so much, but like certain other moms will be like, oh, pues, así somos hombres, you
mhm,
tienes que superar, like they have anger, and I'm like, okay, I have anger too. That doesn't mean that I'm over here like,
yeah,
and so I think it's really important, like advocacy skills too.
mhm,
Um, Men are taught to protect themselves. They're taught to speak out, against someone harming them or someone trying to get their job, but a lot of the times when women do that, right, they're seen as, oh my god, they're disrespectful, they're talking back, they're bitches,
yeah.
and so it's really important to, like, again, how can men show up for women? Teach us how to protect ourselves too in these situations, right? Because we know we live in such an unsafe world. And
Mhm.
so if, you know, and sometimes you're not going to be there, right? In certain spaces. And so are we just going to just be quiet and take it? That's, I don't think that's okay. So those are other ways that I'm thinking of how men can show up in these spaces for women.
No, yeah, and it's interesting because when we talk about protection, also one last thing with the rewards, like I feel like
Mhm.
the within patriarchal structures, the rewards that are offered towards women are exclusively linked to what men provide for them, not everything that they can acquire independently. Because it's
Mhm.
children, because you're a mother, because you have to take care because the man has to do other things, or you're
Mhm.
protected. But and connecting it with what you just said, the term protection, I have a little conflicting view with it, because what are women usually need protection from? It usually other
Mhm.
men, you know?
Yeah.
So like besides, and I don't say this as you like, I don't say that as women should ask men to protect them or to
Mhm.
be there or something like that. It would be like men should stop promoting violence. Men should stop
Exactly.
because when we talk about masculinity in R.W. Connell mentions hegemonic masculinity and complicit masculinity. And I
Mhm.
feel like there's way more, in terms of how it's maintained. I feel like complicit masculinity is doing the heavy work, because hegemonic
Yeah.
masculinity, you can say, like, oh, it's so sexist, this is so wrong. And it's very
Mhm.
clear, crude answers, like examples. But with
Mhm.
complicit masculinity, would be like, oh, well, I have sexist views towards women, but since they're not as aggressive as what we see online or in the news, then I'm good and I don't have to change anything or stuff like that.
Mhm.
And that's where we get through like how people like invisibilize the process of carrying Marianismo views to society.
Yeah.
Because it's like
Exactly.
what you said before, like, oh, like you're calladito te ves más bonita. like because you're delicate, because women are flowers and stuff like that, and it might
Mhm.
seem positive in the surface, but really it hides some very
Mhm.
like dangerous views.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, I would like to, since you did research with the queer community, um
Mhm.
part of hegemonic masculinity is this whole queer phobia, or anything
Yeah.
phobic that is not in cis heterosexual normativity. So
Mhm.
in terms of gender expectations, how would you say that it's more characteristic on behalf of how it affects queer people? Because I would say
Yeah.
that they would be very, everyone's affected, but they specifically, since they're not gender conforming or
Mhm.
hegemonically conforming or
Mhm.
something like that, like they're hit in a specific way, because at
Yes.
least if I'm a straight man, I can fit into something. What do,
Mhm.
in a mass scale, like queer people don't have something to fit into, unless they find themselves in a community that lend them like a mold where they can fit into. So
Yeah.
how would you say that they're affected?
Oh, so many ways. I think this study was um, hurting and healing to do because, again, also being queer myself, when I was doing these interviews, I was just like, oh my God, like, that happened to me in my head, right? That happened to me too. Or like, it was in an odd way comforting to know that these experiences wasn't just like my own, isolative experience, that there were other people going through this too.
Mhm.
And I think that also made it even more important for me to get this work out. And so it was really hard for a lot of them because early on they were like, no soy esto, or like, this is weird, or why do I have to do this? And so, a lot of like the girls would like play with cars and things like that, or like to play with their brothers a lot. And then, they'd be told like, oh, no eres niña buena. Or, unfortunately there was some religious trauma in there where, that's also connected with machismo and marianismo, right? Like how we are taught these roles as well is through the church, and like how you should show up. And that's where one client in particular got a lot of the self-silencing teachings of like, you don't say what goes on in the church and to you, and all these things. And she went through a lot of physical and sexual abuse very young. And so and again, even after she tried to disclose this to someone, she was like, that's not true. You're a liar. Like, it was always put on the blame of the girl or the woman. And so it's been really hard for them to find a space, I would say. Um, and at the same time, I think my participants are in a space where they have been able to kind of. Mm, be step more into their authentic selves, and all of them very different. And I'll give you an example of that. Is one of my favorite stories is one client that is in social work. They identify as demisexual, and they had a very machista father, from what they explained to me. Had very homophobic views, would make, very harmful comments in the dinner table, things like that. And it was during COVID time that he actually got a job at a very famous gay bar in LA. Um, and that experience would connect him to his queer child. He would come to understand the culture and the community. And I think it was just being in the community, and like, I guess, challenging that fear, that stigma of like, oh, these people are, sinful, they're demonic, they're sexual, they're crazy. And it's like, no, maybe we're a little weird. Not gonna lie to you, pero somos familia. We're a place of authenticity, a place of creativity, a place of love. And he was able to see that firsthand. And so then later on, my participant tells me that, oh, my dad brought over one of his coworkers, one of his very gay Oaxacan coworkers. And she was surprised. And I think the reason they connected is through cultural ties because the dad was Oaxacan, the coworkers was Oaxacan, and that's how they connected. You know,
It's
and so yeah.
Yeah, no, like it's interesting because we right now I feel like it's a very tense moment in the United States,
Mm,
for example, and in
yes.
the world in general, because like through the fighting towards visibility of the queer community, you see very conservative groups that are trying to fight back. So that like the more people try to visibilize their experiences, the more another group tries to maintain the status quo, and usually not usually but there is a lot of times that it is done through violent measures, be it
Yeah.
symbolic violence, social violence, verbal, physical, and stuff like that, or political violence. um and it's interesting because yes, this is a pillar of their identity, but this isn't the only thing about them.
Mhm.
It doesn't define them, as in like it defines part of them. It doesn't define
Yeah.
them because they have cultural background. Like you can be very family focused and queer and stuff like that. Like even for example, if you're infertile, that doesn't mean you couldn't be a great mother. It just means you can't
Mhm.
give birth, but you can adopt or something like that,
Yeah.
or what they call reconstructed families, that you marry into someone that already has a child or something like that. And it's
Mhm.
interesting because I feel like within queer phobia, you get that blindness of
Mhm.
this is the only thing that define them, and I'm against this, so I'm against them. And it's a
Yeah.
very complicated process. It truly is. And
Mhm.
I'm speaking from privilege. I try to visualize these experiences in these types of projects. For example, like I'm welcoming to the LGBTQ community because within the community there are men that need help with their mental health, and my project is towards mental health,
Mhm.
not towards a
Yeah.
specific gender identity or like gender roles. And I say gender identity because although I still focus on men, I try to include as much people as possible, including any type of person that doesn't identify as men, because
Mhm.
they have men in their lives and they can support men with their mental health. They
Exactly.
can understand
Yeah.
masculinity and stuff like that. But yeah,
Definitely.
to close out the episode, I would love if you could give like a type of recommendation for those
Mhm.
people that are trying to like understand the queer experience and female experience, like anyone that how could we deconstruct Marianismo in an effective way based on your research and experiences? Like what would you tell these people that have the disposition to change and to help be agents of change, but don't
Mm.
quite understand these complex systemic structures just such as Marianismo?
Mhm. I think it's really just important to be informed of these topics, and share them like how we're doing today. Um, it was interesting que when I asked about machismo, everyone was like, boom, 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 this is what it is.
Hmm.
You know, for Marianismo, I had some participants being like, ¿Qué es eso? What is that? Like, explain it to me. I think I know what it is, but I'm not sure. And again, when I went through the virtues, the values of, self-silencing, religious, nurture, all these things, they were like, oh, it's mi mama, that's my mom, that's my aunt, that's and so it's not that people don't have these experiences. We do, right? I think we don't have the language, we don't have that access to have these conversations. And I think another really important thing, even speaking from my personal experience, I didn't learn about Marinismo until I think I was an undergrad in my like feminist studies class. And so we also have to understand that these topics are like in these very privileged spaces, ¿verdad? And so universities, like feminist studies classes. And so we have to bring these into the community.
Hmm.
Um, there was a client that I'm thinking about right now that I worked with that I was very, very, very nervous to work with her porque, again, very traditional, old school Mexicana. And she was referred to me because her kiddo was transitioning. I think 17-year-old kiddo wanted to transition from female to male. And, I was like, oh my gosh, she's going to hate me. Like, we're not going to work well together. Like, and especially because I present, very differently. Um, I was very concerned and as I always do, I try to make a very safe and collaborative space. And I told her, like, I'm here to, help you have a supportive and safe relationship with, your kiddo. And so they would bring up a lot of like their kiddo, their family, everyone else.
Mhm.
And so there was one session where I was like, we're gonna just talk about you,
Yeah.
okay? And your experiences and your childhood. And she, it was a lot of trauma in that childhood. And then after she had kind of given me a little bit of her story, I said, have you heard about Marianismo? And she was like, huh? ¿Qué es eso? And again, went through the definition. I remember she started crying. And she was like, oh my God, like, is that's why I was treated like that when I got divorced.
Mhm.
That's why I feel so like guilty for being a single mom. That's why I feel like so bad that I feel like I'm doing everything wrong. And I'm like, you're not doing anything wrong. Like you being here, trying to understand your child is amazing. And I
Mhm.
can't speak like for a lot of parents that are willing to do that willing to face their fears head on. And she was, we did a lot of work through guilt and grief. But that like kind of gave her like that wake up call of like, oh my gosh. And so I think creating more communities like that, whether it's just one on one or, comadreando, ¿verdad? But in a way that it promotes mental health, it promotes clarity, it promotes having these like conversations because we've also been silent for very long about what's been happening to women and men, right? Because men have also been, I think men are also silenced in the way that you guys are been like told you have to be the rock, you have to be the strong one, you have to be the provider. You can't break down, right? And so men are also silenced emotionally in a very different way, but again, very interconnected.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, and I feel like feminism, for example, like has done a lot of good toward gender equality, but it does have its limitations. For
Mhm,
example, how men interact with feminism. Feminism
mhm,
offered a chance to redefine women's purpose in society, and it's been very useful, and it has included, some feminists have included the queer community, other feminists haven't. We see turfs and stuff like that. So it's not a perfect movement by no means, even though it's done a lot of good, but men have not had that massive movement to redefine their
mhm,
roles. So you have a very changing society that's then they're not changing along with it. They're trying to sustain like patriarchal views,
mhm,
even if they don't do it through a violent way. They still feel
yeah,
like I'm not I don't fit in or something like that. They
yeah,
they feel without a purpose and stuff like that, and that makes it
mhm,
difficult for them to join the fight
mhm,
towards gender equality and stuff like that, or to have empathy towards women because they feel rejected by women and stuff like that. And
mhm,
it's it's interesting because they have some problems that they do need to take care of, but there are other problems that's basically they're digging their own grave. um
mhm,
and it's like it's a very fine line how you interact with that to not make men feel so attacked but also attacking what needs to be fixed. And it's a very
yeah,
interesting, well, dilemma
yeah.
we have right now, but
I think and maybe one recommendation I would just have for everyone to do
Mhm.
is like one thing I'm reading right now is A Will to Change. It's Men, Masculinity and Love by
The
Bell
bell
Hooks.
hooks, of course, yeah.
It's such
We
a
love it,
good book.
yeah.
And I think it really like it really just kind of tries to shed your fear around men. And I think
It
especially
emphasizes
as
them.
someone that's also been impacted by men in my life, right?
Mhm.
And someone that still knows the importance they have in my life, is that like I want to make sure that, in this inclusivity piece, that I'm also thinking about men. Like you said, like they're a part of this movement, this mental health movement, and we can't just leave them behind. Um, and so one thing also just want to finish with is like caballerismo is very good trait that was found, especially in gay men, that help them increase their ability to stay on their HIV medication. So, there are again protective factors in these like cultural nuances, right? Of like they're very complicated gender roles, but we can find the good in them.
Of
So,
course, yeah. But that critical thinking needs to be promoted because we,
yes.
on the surface, it seems really hard to like, oh, should I not be a man? Should I not be manly? Or women being feminine? Or queer people, like, what do they do then if they're not gender
Mhm,
conforming? But
mhm,
yeah, it is a very interesting thing we should break out and analyze and stuff like that. And like people like you, people like me, and other people found in the conference are doing their part and trying to work with this in a social level. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do. That's that being said. So yeah,
Yes.
with this we close out our episode. We want to remind our audience that this podcast and this project does not replace therapy. If you think you need therapy or any type of mental health professional services, please contact a mental health professional or your healthcare provider so you can be properly oriented in what services are available. Other than that, in Puerto Rico, we have the 988 emergency hotline for suicide and other mental health emergencies. Sandra, I don't know if you have any type of line like that in USA or in Las Vegas or wherever you are that you would like to share.
It's the same line, 988
Okay,
for.
perfect. So yeah, that would be it. Anything you'd like to say? So to we close out the episode?
No, I thank you for having me. This was a wonderful conversation to have, and I'm just looking forward to your continued work in masculinity and mental health.
Oh, thank you for saying yes. It was great to like just bump into you in the conference, and now we can have
Yeah,
this conversation and
and
connect
touch.
online. But we're connecting to different parts of the world. So yeah, that
I
would be
still
it.
hear the little cookie frogs.
Yes, of
I
course.
miss the
And
sound.
I have the window next to me, but it's shut.
Yeah.
So if it were open, you'd hear them more than me,
You could
honestly.
hear them everywhere.
Yeah.
I know, I miss that sound.
Yeah, but yeah.
All
So
right.
that would be all. Thank you for coming to Masculino 98. Have a great day.